UN at 75. What's different? What's the same? Do you know anyone who has never heard of the United Nations? Probably not. For most of the world's population, the UN has been around our entire lives. But do you know anyone who doesn't really know what the UN does? The answer to that question is almost certainly a lot more ambivalent. Some know it as the body which helps the vulnerable or the most vulnerable in crisis. Some may have heard of disagreements and stalemates at the UN Security Council. Others may think of the UN as a vast, bloated, evil organization which spread its tentacles into too many aspects of life. The UN is embarking on the biggest survey ever undertaken. All three of the least particle is true, but none entirely accurate. The United Nations was created on October the 24th, 1945, from the ashes, shock, and slaughter of the Second World War. The solemn ceremony in San Francisco brought together just 51 nations because large part of the world was still colonized. With hindsight, it is understandable that countries which had fought so bitterly for 6 long years would want to come together to find a multilateral way of solving disagreement and tackling challenges. But the United Nations was, for its time, a surprisingly radical concept. 75 years ago, the logic of setting up an international organization like the United Nations was not necessarily obvious, says historian and professor of international relations Mohammadou. The world was coming out of a large-scale conflict, and the dynamic of multilateralism, the very concept of it, was not well known. But there was the realization that this was the moment, if ever, to imagine a different type of world. This notion that you have one place where all of the nation with one equal vote can come together and debate the questions of the world. A beast of an organization. Fast forward 75 years and the UN is embarking on the biggest survey ever undertaken to find out what people think of the organization and whether they think it needs change. Certainly, over the decades since 1945, the UN itself has changed. There are now 193 member states, among them many former colonies who gained independence in the 1950s and the 60s. Master student Jasmine Paku Aduro Bonsha, who is studying at Geneva Graduate Institute, described the UN as a beast of an organization which impacts all our lives. That's not necessary as a criticism, but she thinks the UN needs to adapt to reflect its current membership. I think the structure of the UN itself needs to change. Certain the member states are not happy with the current UN system. When the UN was created, most of its members were still colonized. So the UN, as it existed then, but still now that same constitution has not actually reflect the changes that have happened in the world. The member states now were not member states then. Some members more equal than others. Why exactly are some member states not happy with the system? The reason goes back to its original concept of all nations coming together with one equal vote. In fact, the UN structure is designed to make some more equal than others, and that, says Mohamedou, is a fatal flaw built into the UN from the start. The UN Security Council, with 5 permanent veto-holding members, the US, Russia, China, France, and the United Kingdom, is a snap of the political reality of 1945. It really is about the victory of the World War II, he says. He points out that despite the world changes in the decades since, Germany, for example, does not sit on the Security Council, but France does. Important countries around the world, such as India, Nigeria, and Brazil, were also absent. It raises questions about why those particular 5 countries have a veto and a permanent seat on all of the matters that are critical to the world, Mohamedou noted. It's a fundamental problem that the UN has. The debate about reform of the Security Council has been going on for years, decade even, and has never found a solution. The P5, as the Security Council members are known, are not rushing to give up power, while the other member states cannot agree on how the power were, if it ever, to spread around more generously should it divide it up. Paralyzed. It's a disappointing paralyzed, one that is marred by paralysis at the Security Council itself. While the P5 may quietly agree to hang on to their permanent seats and their vetoes, they don't often agree on much else. Between them, the United States and China recently blocked a UN Security Council resolution on tackling the coronavirus pandemic because the US wanted to explicitly name China as a source of the virus, and also objection to mention the World Health Organization, which Washington says too close to China. Meanwhile, Beijing was uncomfortable with the mention of transparency in the resolution. Such political posturing can have tragic consequences. The main point of the resolution was to back UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' call for a general ceasefire, to allow healthcare workers in places like Syria and Yemen to go about their work fighting COVID-19 without the risk of being shot or bombed. My viewers and subscribers, it's a whole long story. The humanitarian arms of the United Nations, many of those agencies are headquarters in Geneva, known that posturing all too well, time and again, from Syria to Yemen, those big powers who came together in 1945 to create the UN, once described as the World Worship or the World Workshop for Peace, have been unable to deliver to their vision. When Bernadette Costello Hollingsworth, currently Deputy Director of the International Protection at the UN Refugees Agency, UNHCR, was sent to Jordan in 2013 to set up an Iraq camp in Syrian refugees for Syrian refugees. She didn't believe that the war would still be going on 7 years long later. Nobody could ever have thought that all these refugees 7 years later would still be in Jordan or Lebanon, she says. I'm still in contact with a woman in Azra. She sent me pictures of her house in southern Syria, totally destroyed. And I felt she was losing hope. In the UN, we try not to lose hope. And I think our work is to stand by refugees for as long as they need us. But sometimes during this work, you go through the moment of doubt, and it's sometimes difficult. Hope at 75? So, is there hope for the UN in its 75th year? Despite its many setbacks, divisions, and doubt, Mohamedou sees some bright spot for the organization. During the 90s, he pointed out the UN forced an impressive list of issues onto the global agenda, ones that have now become key policies item for most government. Right at the end of the Cold War, there was an opportunity for UN to show whether it's relevant or not, he says, noting that the UN did set up with key world conferences such as Sustainable Development in Rio in 1992, Human Rights in Vienna in 1993, Population in Cairo in 1994, Social Development in Copenhagen in 1995, and the Conference on Women in Beijing, Universal Jurisdiction in Rome in 1998, and the Durban Conference on Racism in 2001. Mohamedou sees that decades as evidence that the UN is capable of creating standards and norms for our planet and of making sure the issues that affect us all, from climate to change to human rights, social justice, were addressed. He sees dangers, but also possible opportunities ahead. We have this multicycle of raising nationalism. You could even speak of neo-authoritarianism in many places. In the US, in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, he points out, this is a crisis, but out of a crisis can come opportunities. If you combine this with the most recent crisis, the coronavirus pandemic, then you might have the condition for new debates and new engagement. There could be epiphanic moments, a wake-up call. Costello, Hollingsworth, and Poka Oduro Bonsa also believe the coronavirus pandemic ought to be a loud reminder that the world needs multilateralism and, by definition, the United Nations. Multilateralism, the one we have experienced over the last 75 years, may not always be perfect, says the UNHCR Deputy Director, but it is the solution to global issues. We are now experiencing a pandemic, and I believe it is the only through multilateralism that we can address global issues like climate change or displacement of people. We live in an interdependent world, and some member state governments who are tempted to think that they can find solution on their own will be proven wrong. This is what history has shown us. My hope is that the UN at 75 will make changes, says Odura Bonsa. I think right now we see that it is in our best interests of countries to cooperate. If moved beyond the unilateral and single-minded thinking that this is not going to affect our countries, it was a great wake-up call to see that no one is exempt from things that are happening in other parts of the world, added Graduate Institute student. It is a shame that it had to take a pandemic to show the world that we need each other. But I believe it could be a great starting point to have conversation about why we really require the help of each other. This is a post here from Geneva that is out, and I am trying to read it and get it properly over to the English properly to everybody, so we can all understand it. The pandemic has wake up a lot of persons, a lot of countries, a lot of individuals. And we hope that in the near future, we can come together in unity as the UN is trying to do. Maybe the way they are doing it is not the way how we see it to be done. But at the ending of the day, we need each other to survive. And the more we come together and sort of our situation by dialoguing, coming together, sit at the table, if that's what is meaning to do, and get things sorted out, we will start to see a better change in our communities, in our cities, in our town, and in our countries. Once again, this is JCon TV out of Zurich, saying unto each and every one of us, in this time of COVID-19, let us wear a mask. Let us wash our hands. Let us do everything in our natural way to avoid the spread of coronavirus. And walk in peace, my friend. Shalom.